We are going to start with a little bit of a look into Age of Overlord today still. As I promised, outside of SP Little Knight, the most impactful thing in Age of Overlord is the Diabellstar / Snake Eye stuff. There's a card from Duelist Nexus which got an errata in the OCG, but for us it was already printed with the correct name. Sinful Spoils of Subversion Snake Eye. When this was originally announced for the OCG, no one knew that this was part of an archetype. No one knew that. I guess they just released the card and then looked at it and they were like, that artwork is kind of dope. We want to make an archetype around it. And then they made an archetype around it and then they had to change its name in the OCG. But in the TCG, it was already printed with the correct name. This card in itself is not that great. It's an okay removal spell. It's not seen play at all yet in the TCG. And even with it being searchable in the Snake Eye archetype, it's probably not going to be more than a one-off sometimes. That's what they do in the OCG, is they sometimes play one, I think, in the side deck in case they want to search removal. When we talk about Snake Eye / Sinful Spoils, it's kind of two archetypes that belong together. All right, original Sinful Spoils, Snake Eye. This card is the reason why the most common pairing for the Sinful Spoils / Snake Eye cards in the OCG right now is Rescue Ace. If you read this card, you will notice special summon one level 1 fire monster from your hand or deck is incredibly generic, does not come with any restriction whatsoever. This card is seeing a whole lot of play in all kinds of different decks. Of course, in Rescue Ace, this card is being used to special summon Hydrant out of your deck. But there is other ways you can pair it up with. Notable targets include Infernoid Decatron, Jet Synchron, which is something that the OCG used to do it to summon Chaos Ruler. Very, very generic support card for all kind of fire decks that have a level 1 that they really want. We started with one of the best cards in the archetype, the reason why it is so splashable in a whole lot of different decks, and honestly one of the reasons to even play the deck. And then on top of just being an emergency teleport, essentially, it also gives you a follow-up effect. Basically, it's an emergency teleport on the first turn with some cost attached to it, and then it is a Rhoda on the second turn. It is pretty damn powerful. We have Snake Eye XL. Snake Eyes are all level 1 fire monsters. This card pretty good. However, I don't think in the OCG at least we've seen any success out of pure Snake Eyes. They all have this like effect on summon and then they can tag out into another Snake Eye from hand or deck. So you can like use XL to search, then use XL to go into Orc, then use Orc to revive XL, then use Orc to go into whatever. You can already tell the Snake Eye cards have some issues with Maxi, which maybe that's the reason why they haven't been used in the OCG. Maybe it has more potential in the TCG. Snake Eye's Flamberge Dragon. This one is not a level 1. This one is level 8. Honestly, a pretty good card that could eventually see some play for sure. The fact that you can just send this card from hand or field to the grave by some means and revive 2 level 1s from the grave is pretty damn interesting, and then it even has some usage on the board. Then we have the Shrine of Serpentine Sight, Snake Eye. This thing is the field spell. Not a bad field spell, but it's definitely much worse than what other archetypes have. If I'm looking at freaking the Visa Starfrost archetypes, where every single field spell is just straight up busted custom out of their ass. This card is not bad because it gives you something to send away for your Snake Eyes, right? Like all of these need to send the face-up card you control to the graveyard to be able to get their effects. 1100 because Snake Eyes is rolling 2 1s with dice. Ah, I see. Why do these not have 1100 attack then? Anyways, the card on its own does not do that much. You need another way to enable it, which is, I'm just applying high standards to field spells now because of all the broken field spells we've had in the past. This is still not a bad card. The Glaring Ruler Snake Eyes, not a bad card, but I don't think it's very good. You're gonna probably only play one, maybe if it's searchable in a dedicated Snake Eye deck. Don't ask me what the lore behind this is, but this is not all there is to Snake Eye. Snake Eye, for some reason, has a connection to this archetype called the Sinful Spoils cards / Diabellstar. Diabellstar is in some of these artworks, like right here. The card called Diabellstar is somehow part of this lore, part of this archetype. Diabellstar, the Dark Witch, and it's a pretty damn good card. The most important thing here is level 7, send the card from hand or field to the grave, special summon it, on summon, get a Sinful Spoils set from your deck. Obviously, the teleport for level 1 fire monsters is called Sinful Spoils. Not every single Snake Eye card is a Sinful Spoil card. These two are not, but this one is a Sinful Spoil. So Diabellstar can summon itself by sending one card to the graveyard and then sets the teleport, which made her, for example, a 1-card Chaos Ruler. This is how you can grab your Hydrant super consistently, right? Sinful Spoils Hunter Fiend. This is the wanted picture of Diabellstar the Dark Witch. Quick play spell card. This is by far the best card out of the bunch because it is very simply a quick play Rhoda for your Diabellstar from deck or graveyard. And then, of course, you're going to summon your Diabellstar that you've searched. Then you're going to grab a Sinful Spoils. You're going to activate that Sinful Spoils. And then you can just use this effect in the graveyard to draw a card. The most common version of these decks play 1 Diabellstar, 3 of Quick Play Spell, and 1 of the Snake Eye Sinful Spoils, right? Because you want to open the Quick Play Spell. The one thing that I like about this engine is that, yes, you only play 1 Diabellstar, and yes, you only play 1 of this spell. Technically, you don't want to draw those cards, but it's not bad to draw Diabellstar. It's not bad to draw your freaking emergency teleport for a level 1 fire, right? Because if you just hard open the Diabellstar, you can still summon it, you can still search this one, you simply don't get the draw later. So that's the cool part about it. They're not garnets. I think that's very good card design. Whether this card is good card design is a whole nother question because it's a Rhoda that also draws a card, so it's basically freaking Engage. Different story. And then Sinful Spoils of Doom, Luciella. Most of the decks playing the Diabellstar in the OCG are not using this card. The decks are only using this package as a way to consistently get to level 1 fire monsters. If you focus your deck maybe more around Diabellstar or Snake Eye, this card can suddenly become a pretty good card because what this card does is it makes your Diabellstar unaffected. All of your opponent's monsters lose 2,500 attack and anything that reaches 0 is destroyed, which is very powerful, especially because it's a quick play spell. So you can use it going first and second. Like this card can function as a sort of board breaker. You can go first and you can set it. It's a pretty damn good card if you really think about it. It's just a matter of, are people going to play a Diabellstar focused deck? Because this right here is just an example list from the OCG, but this is not a Diabellstar focused deck. This is just a Rescue Ace deck that's using the Diabellstar cards to get to the Hydrant. So in a deck like this one, you wouldn't play a card like that. And then we have Sinful Spoils of Betrayal, Sylvia. This card is mediocre, I want to say. I think the quick play spell was better. So, of course, in order to use this small package, you need to be able to make use of the level 1 fire monster. It's not an engine like, let's compare it to something like the Adventure Engine, which found a home in a lot of different decks. For the Adventure Engine, the quote-unquote only requirement was your deck needs to not need the normal summon effect. For this one, the requirement is, I would say, a little bit more narrow. Your deck needs to use level 1 fire monster. People in chat are saying, like, most decks can make some use out of Jet Synchron. Sure. The question is, will most decks use it? As to which, I'm not sure. Because something like Rescue Ace, the answer is super obvious. Every single Rescue Ace is going to use this package. It's mandatory. So every single deck that really wants a level 1 fire monster is going to love this engine. No questions asked. But the bigger question to me personally, when it comes to, like, you know, thinking about this before Age of Overlord releases, how many other decks want to play this engine? And also, how good is something like Rescue Ace going to become in the TCG? Because currently it's arguably like a lower tier 2 deck. Is it going to go tier 1? Is it going to go tier 1.5? Still middle of tier 2? I'm not sure. I think the boost here to this deck is incredible. I can't help but think that a deck that was already like able to top YCSs, even get all the way to second place at a YCS. If a deck gets this kind of support, I have to say, I just think that's definitely a real possibility that the Diabellstar / Sinful Spoils cards make Rescue Ace a top tier contender. Let's talk about 2 other really big deals in the upcoming set. Obviously, I'm referring to Stellar Nemesis Typhoon Doomsday Star, which I think has a slightly different name in the TCG, and then of course SP Little Knight. This card is basically the dark version of Zeus, which is pretty damn cool. This card is one of the best designed cards I've seen in such a long time. Whoever designed this card, probably a genius. I'm not saying that it's an incredibly broken card, because it is not that. What this card does effectively is when your opponent has popped off on the turn before, or even on that turn, you know, summoning multiple monsters from the extra deck, at any point during your turn, you can go into this card with the biggest monster you have. This effectively ends your turn, because you cannot summon afterwards. Basically, the last action of your turn can now be XYZ into Stellar Nemesis Typhoon, which locks your opponent out of activating anything with 3000 or more attack, which you can do this to out something like a Baron the Fleur. So this card is not broken by any means, because the drawback on this card is massive. I want you to think of a situation where your opponent has made a board and you start playing into it. You can like barely crack the board, but not quite. In any of those situations, this card is going to be insane, because whatever amount of options, whatever amount of plays you have going second into your opponent's board, you now have one layer on top of that. Whatever you were doing before, you now have one more option, because you can just play into your opponent's board. Once you run out of extenders, you run out of options, you can just make one more. The reason why I love this card so much is because it's an extra deck option that can theoretically make every single deck stronger at going second, just slightly. It's not a non-engine card that I need to hard draw going second. It's not a card that I can put into my deck and then it's going to suck going first, but is only good going second. All the things I hate about board breakers, right? Like, board breakers are sometimes necessary in this game, but I hate the fact that like they don't do anything game one unless you play them in your main deck, and then they're going to be bad going first and all that kind of stuff. All this card does is it takes up one space in your extra deck, and you're going to have an additional option going second every single time. And I think that's incredibly well thought out. I wish we had more cards like that made going second more viable in Yu-Gi-Oh in general. It's going to be a card that you're definitely going to want to have one copy of, because a lot of decks are going to want to play it at some point. Okay, so we have already started looking at Age of Overlord yesterday. We're going to continue doing that today. Let's talk about the Horus cards a little bit, because we already have the reveals on the Horus cards, but we haven't really talked about it in that much detail. The Horus cards are quite simple and easy to explain, actually. The entire archetype revolves around the card called Pharaonic Sarcophagus. So this card has 3 effects. 2 of them I would consider bonus effects. One of them is the actual reason to use the card, and that is that it gets to Foolish Burial your Horus monsters, because your Horus monsters have effects while in the graveyard. If you control Pharaonic Sarcophagus, you can special summon this card from your graveyard, and you can only summon it once per turn this way. All of the Horus monsters have this, and they are all level 8s, which means that if you have a Pharaonic Sarcophagus and you have a couple cards to discard, you can hypothetically summon 4 level 8s onto your board, and they do not have any sort of restrictions. It's not like you can only summon Horus for the rest of the turn or whatever. You can summon all of them out. You can exceed with them. You can link with them. You can do whatever you want with them. There's no restriction. In my book, that sounds pretty solid, because you all know there's a couple of very good rank 8 monsters out there, right? You can do Zombie Vampire to mill 4 and summon, Giant Trainer to draw 3 freaking cards. You can obviously also make rank 8s that have like negate effects like Hope Harbinger. So all of these have the effect to summon themselves from the graveyard. They all have bonus effects though. The best one by far is the Glory of Horus Imseti, because you discard it and another card to search the sarcophagus, which is super crucial, because if you don't find the sarcophagus, they don't do anything. And Imseti searches the sarcophagus, draws a card. At first, it's neutral, like you discard 2 cards, search the sarcophagus, and draw a card, so you still have the same amount of cards in your hand as you did before. And then you also summon it back from the graveyard because you control the sarcophagus. It's basically a +1, free level 8 onto the board, enables your sarcophagus, all that kind of stuff. Most of these have some bonus effects that would only really matter if you play like a pure Horus deck, which as far as I'm aware is not really a thing. In the OCG so far, most people only use this as like an engine in other decks. They don't use a pure Horus deck. Just keep that in mind, that these cards have some pretty strong bonus effects. They're just pretty hard to pull off because it's by an opponent's card effect. They will make sure that you don't get it, but it sometimes can make it awkward for your opponent. The idea behind the deck, if you play it as a pure Horus deck, is that the sarcophagus makes it so that your opponent cannot destroy them by card effects unless you target them. So you can't like Raigeki a bunch of Horus monsters. You can't Darkhold a bunch of Horus monsters. You have to target them individually, but all of them trigger if you remove one of them. They do not trigger from battle though, but they are all pretty big. And then there's also a trap called Canopic Protector. So this card is actually quite good for the archetype. You bring your Horus monsters out in response to your opponent's cards that try to get rid of them. And on top of that, the reason why I think this card is really good is this card is also free discard for the sarcophagus. So this is a very synergistic card. I actually really like the design of this card. It's very, very cool. Now, the design of these Horus monsters is questionable because they are very abusable for rank 8 spam or even link climb spam, right? And in my opinion, where this deck fails design-wise, there's no pure Horus deck. It doesn't really work because the entire Horus deck relies on the sarcophagus, and if you don't have the sarcophagus or your opponent removes the sarcophagus from the field with something like Ghost Ogre, Cosmic Cyclone, whatever, your entire strategy doesn't work. What's missing for this deck, what I'm hoping for in the future, maybe a boss monster for it that's like unique to the archetype, so you don't just spam generic rank 8 monsters, and maybe some support that makes the deck more consistent as its own deck, but preferably with some sort of restriction that makes it so I cannot just spam level 8 monsters in every single deck out there, right? So that's the Horus cards. In my opinion, good cards. Potential for the future, not as its own deck right now, but maybe as an engine, right? You can splash triple Imseti, one or multiple sarcophagus, and then one other Horus card, right? That way you can just Imseti, discard, search sarcophagus, discard one card from your hand, summon back the 2 Horuses from the graveyard, instant rank 8. That is something that the OCG is experimenting with right now in Tearlament because they don't have Chaos Ruler anymore. Basically, if you draw Imseti, you can make a zombie vampire, for example. So those are the Horus cards. I'm personally looking forward to them. I think they are currently not too powerful, but interesting. Of course, I'm a little bit concerned about the fact that they simply have like no restrictions on them and can spam rank 8s really easily. Like something like consistently making Coach King Giant Trainer. That's very powerful, right? That's dangerous. New Visa support, which is somewhat relevant, I believe. We have Visa Samsara here. This card's name becomes Starfrost while on the field or in the graveyard. This alone already makes this card interesting, I believe, because it's a normal summon Visa Starfrost with the stats of the Rhino Heart, Reichhards, and so on and so forth. That is pretty damn interesting because you can just normal summon and you make Lightheart into Reichphobia into yada yada yada. I think it's a 1-card combo into some stuff. I'm gonna be honest with you guys, all of these new Visa Starfrost lore cards, they're all kind of stinkers. All of them except for Visa Samsara. Visa Samsara is a potentially good card. The other ones, I remember reading them. I think we can just skip them because there's a lot of words on them and they're all not very good. The synchro we should read because it's literally Mannadium Kitkalos. Mannadium Trilo Sagda. This card is just... It's... I don't think this card is completely like borderline broken. I just think it's very, very good and even very, very generic. It's not even just for Mannadium. It's just good in so many different ways. Level 6 Synchro that summons a tuner back from the graveyard. You could compare it to something like Axel Stardust Dragon. The only thing that stops this thing from being super, super, super broken is that it's a tuner itself. That is something that you guys might have missed right now. It's not an instant Baron. You cannot revive a level 2 tuner and then make an Axel Stardust and then make a Baron with that. In Mannadium, you can actually synchro climb with this. This makes Reinhardt a 1-card calamity. Yeah, let's be real. Mannadium doesn't get a lot of support from this set. It's only really 2 useful cards, I think. Maybe Visa Samsara and then this card. But this one is huge. We could look at one video real quick on Mannadium combos post Age of Overlord just to get an idea. Huh? Target 1 tuner or 1 level 7 or 8 dragon synchro in your grave. Special summon it in defense. Also, you cannot special summon monsters from the extra deck for the rest of this turn after this card resolves exact synchros. If Crimson Dragon and or level 7 or 8 you control, you destroy it. Okay. Nah, I don't want that. I don't want that to happen. I don't want that. I don't want people to be able to do that to me. I really don't. It doesn't matter what the exact best combo is, but matter of fact is this shit is doing too much. That's what we should take away from this. The thing is, Mannadium, I wouldn't call it a good deck right now, but it's definitely like not terrible, and it's definitely viable. And it definitely does not get worse by adding these cards into the mix. No way it doesn't get a decent push from this release. So we'll just see if that's enough to catapult it into like tier 1, or if it still dabbles around tier 2. The one vibe I'm getting from Age of Overlord is that you're definitely going to want to have some hand traps. I don't think we really need to talk about Shino Birds very much. Vanquish Soul. Vanquish Soul Jiaolong. This card is very good for Vanquish Soul. The problem is that this card does not really help you find Raisin, even though you might think it does, because it can add a Vanquish Soul card from your deck to your hand. But realistically, if you don't already have Raisin, you're probably not gonna have a way to summon this guy and then still have 2 fire monsters in hand. So while it definitely helps Vanquish Soul, I'm not sure if it's actually going to make it a super viable deck. I'm going to try it. You guys know I love Vanquish Soul, but I don't know if it's good enough. One thing is worth noting about this card. If Vanquish Soul ever gets to play, like if they start with a good hand, if they get into the grind game, it now becomes a lot stronger because this thing is another extender and it adds more, like you get to add more and more cards from your deck to your hand every turn. Like once it gets going, it gets going. This card, if you actually manage to like search it and have 3 different attributes in hand, will inflict 1800 damage to your opponent, special summon a Vanquish Soul from your hand, and destroy only your opponent's monsters. It's a trap card, so it's incredibly situational. You can search it, so maybe a one-off can make its way into Vanquish Soul decks. You have to use this thing for 3 effects. If you don't use this thing for 3 effects, then it's not good enough. Unfortunately, that's already it for Vanquish Soul support. Vanquish Soul after Age of Overlord is gonna remain, in my opinion, in a very similar position as it is now. It's worked a couple times in the past now, right? The deck has topped Worlds. The deck got second at YCS Dortmund. It's just proven that even though the Vanquish Soul engine isn't super powerful or anything, there can be only one is a hell of a card, and in some formats, being a hand trap focused strategy can just be beneficial. It's gonna remain like that, and maybe if that ever ends up being a good meta call, the deck can perform. More Vanquish Soul cards that I hope don't become secret rare. I mean, after seeing what they did to like Bystials and shit, where they released them all in like different rarities, I can see them making this a secret. You look at the entire Vanquish Soul deck, none of it is secret. Literally every single Vanquish Soul card is ultra rare. If they make this thing a secret, that's literally some psychopath behavior. It's probably why it's gonna happen. This shit is gonna be like a worst case, a super rare. Oh my god, please not a super rare. My god. So the question is basically, are they going to make it an ultra rare to make the deck visually pleasing, or are they going to make it a secret rare specifically to piss me off? Okay, we have some Nouvelle support, which we don't really need to talk about. We have this thing, which is not very good. The Watt card, I remember actually being quite good, but I think Watts are still bad. Try me. I mean, you are free to prove me wrong. It would be so funny. I'd be so down for a timeline where people start going to events with blind second Watts after Age of Overlord. I don't think it's gonna happen though. Arias the Labyrinth Butler, though, on the other hand, is a very, very viable card, I think. This is exactly one of those cards that Labyrinth needs, because it makes the trap deck able to use trap cards going second on your opponent's first turn, which is a broken mechanic. I think we can all agree that trap cards are by far the weakest type of Yu-Gi-Oh card and deserve powerful cards like this one. If a card like the Barrier is way too toxic, that is not a general issue of trap cards or a general issue of Labyrinth cards. It's because the Barrier is too powerful. It's not because Arias lets you activate it on your opponent's first turn. People are saying skill drain and anti-spell. That does not work. It has to set normal trap cards from your hand. You cannot set a continuous trap with this, which is another part of it that I like. Arias the Labyrinth Butler, I believe, is the only Labyrinth support in this set, but it is a pretty good one at that. Angel Ring, that's not bad. An Omni Spell Negate that can be equipped to any monster, that's not terrible. I don't know which decks can make use of it. You guys are saying Infernoble, but that's definitely not a terrible card. It's also interesting because if you ever have a way to equip this card in response to your opponent's card, you can chain to your opponent's spell and then you can negate it, which would be interesting. It even negates something like Super Poly or Dark Ruler, which is potentially dangerous. TG, we're not going to go through each individual cards because there's a lot of new TG cards, which I honestly think is... I'm okay with legacy support, but in the case of TG, I'm not really a fan of these cards. They thought the best way to support TG was to just turn it into a freaking combo deck. The TG meta deck back in the day was not a combo deck. It was actually more like a beatdown slash stun kind of thing. Their way of making it playable in 2023 is simply make it a combo deck, which is the same that they did to Altergeist and the same that they did to Blackwing. And spoilers, both of those decks are still ass. There's better combo piles out there, and combo piles aren't even cool. I personally don't love it, but I guess it makes TG like tier 3. So that's TG. Supreme King Dragon Lightworm, Supreme King Bait Magician. This is some Zark support, I believe. This wasn't terrible, but it also wasn't great. MBT did a 10-minute testing on it. Really? Non-ironically, this is tier 2 in the OCG. Really? I've never seen it.
Go for the Gate Magician in hand and then proceed to combat when our opponent tries to flip.
So, is it just a pendulum deck that has a cool trap card, chat? Is it that? What did you expect? I don't know. I probably expected just that. That's probably exactly what I expected. You're right. No, you're right. That's on me for expecting something different. that is good. No, that's my bad. It topped here. Hold up. You had to go back 1.5 months to show me a top 4 Supreme King Magician deck. Yeah. Cool. I'm glad that we talked about that. Another thing we should probably talk about is the Baphomet, the Phantom Beast, Dark Ruler. A new Chimera fusion. This card is good. I don't think it revolutionizes the way you play Chimera. It's probably going to be a one-off fusion. The option to send certain floodgate monsters like King Tiger Vanquish or some stuff like that is definitely scary. Because people are already using King Tiger Vanquish in Chimera sometimes, and now you can make it very consistently. Infernal Flame Banshee was not bad. Generic rank 4 that can add any pyro. It was played in the OCG to make Protoss in Mannadium. I prefer to live my life without knowing about that. I will forget that you said that. We have saved the best for last, chat. This card is by far the best card in Age of Overlord. If this card is going to be a secret rare, we're going to have a problem. The only saving grace is that you probably only need one. But even then, I mean, think of Access Code Talker. That card was always a one-of, and it was still, what, 80 bucks, 90 bucks? The reason why this card is so good is that it's super flexible removal, and it not only provides removal at one spot, it's removal at 2 spots in the game. It does something on summon, and then it does something after that. It has 2 points of interaction with your opponent, basically, which is crazy for a Link 2. That's something you don't even get out of Link 3s typically. Not being able to OTK is a good restriction on it. I like that it has that restriction, but it still is a powerful card because it's such a good board-breaking tool. This card alone is going to make IP Masquerena insane again. Right? IP Masquerena was a really good card when it first came out, but in recent years, it's only felt like a small bonus to your end board. Like having 3 monsters, turning 2 of them into IP Masquerena, then turning IP Masquerena plus 1 more monster into Unicorn, discarding a card just to shuffle a card away was not that powerful. SP Little Knight changes that in multiple ways. First of all, turning an IP Masquerena into 2 disruptions is really strong. The even bigger deal about this card, I think, is it makes IP Masquerena so much harder to just bait. If my opponent normal summons tries to go battle phase, I go IP effect, go into SP, banish their normal summon, and the SP Little Knight on the board is still an interruption after. At any point they keep playing, they activate a card or effect, I get to banish a card from my opponent's field, right? Out of 1 IP Masquerena, I get 2 banishes, which is very, very powerful. It also makes a card like Unchained Soul of Rage a lot more powerful. Use Unchained Soul of Rage, link your opponent's monster away into SP Little Knight, banish 1 other card, and then use SP Little Knight later to banish 1 more card. Unchained Soul of Rage basically removes 3 cards. This card is going to go into every single deck that does not lock itself out of link monsters. Something like Brandon cannot make great use of this card. Every other deck is probably going to play this card. At the time, Access Code Talker was in pretty much any deck. I assume it's going to be very similar to SP Little Knight. In Eternity Code, there was not that many really good cards. There was not that many chase cards, so Access Code was definitely the highest priority one for everybody. For this set, there's a lot of stuff that people are going to want. It's a great set overall. It has the quarter century secret rares. That's gonna spread the value out a little bit more as well. The value of this set is not all in SP Little Knight. So this is Age of Overlord. I'd say like an 8 out of 10 set. It's pretty damn strong. It's gonna have an impact for sure. It's not gonna revolutionize it, right? It's not like a power of the elements, but SP Little Knight alone is gonna change the way we play the game. It's gonna change the way you go second. It's gonna change the way you set up boards. So that alone makes this set very impactful. And then there's a lot of interesting tools to work with. It's all engines that are just going to slot into existing decks, and some decks are going to be working with it better, and some decks are going to be working with it a little bit worse, right? So let's talk about some of the decks that we already have and how they benefit from this set or not benefit from this set. Top decks from YCS Dortmund. Let's see how it's going to affect them. I would say tier more or less stays in a similar position. Like you get some options, but they're probably not going to change the deck too much. Unchained, I don't think it's the deck that benefits the most from SP Little Knight, but it definitely is going to be good after Age of Overlord still. If Tearlament and Unchained remain that popular, Dragon Link in general is going to be well positioned in Age of Overlord format. That is true. Going second, this is one of the decks that can very easily make SP Little Knight. Pearly is a deck that can also make great use of SP Little Knight because all of its monsters are level 1. Honestly, I do think it's a massive deal how well your deck uses SP Little Knight, because the card is so busted that it genuinely might make or break a deck depending on whether it can make use of the card. Genuinely, that's how strong I think the card is. And Pearly is a deck that can make really good use of it. Something that Jordan already pointed out in chat is that Pearly is one of the few decks that can actually still OTK after Little Knight. It only says you cannot attack directly for the rest of the turn, so you can still OTK with happiness. Fluan the Reese cannot use SP Little Knight, which is bad for them. On the other hand, SP Little Knight also is not very good against Flunder because of Empen and Link monsters always being in attack position, and that's that. Branded is like the first deck on this list that actually I think suffers from SP Little Knight. The deck can't use it. Branded Despia just legitimately gains nothing from this set. Everything else gets a little bit stronger. Branded does not. Mannadium, as we can see here, it already was performing. This is YCS Dortmund top cut, top 64. There were 4 Mannadiums in it. That's decent. And the deck only gets better, whether you like it or not. I personally don't like Mannadium, but can't deny that it gets better from the freaking new Synchro and Visa's Samsara. The one thing that might happen is that people start playing Droll and Lockbird again after Age of Overlord. It's decent against Tier, it's good against Dragon Link, it's good against Pearly, it's good against Flu, it can work against Branded, and it's really good against Mannadium. So like, Droll and Lockbird is a card that I could see coming back. I think Labyrinth is still going to suffer from the fact that Unchained is going to remain powerful. Vanquish Soul is going to get a little bit stronger, but I don't know if it's enough to keep it meta relevant, but we'll see. Rescue Ace is one of the big winners of Age of Overlord. Arguably right now, it's not even really viable. But after Age of Overlord, I kind of get it. I kind of understand why you would want to play Rescue Ace after Age of Overlord. It's actually going to be a decent deck. The Diabellstar consistency. Interesting. That means we know 5 of the secret rares already. So far, nothing too crazy is secret rare. I mean, the best secret rare so far is Imseti. We're going to see. I mean, I think, let me be clear here. I think Age of Overlord is a really, really good set. And I think even if they make a lot of the chase cards not secrets, but rather ultra, I still think the set is going to retain value. There's like almost no universe where this set is going to be bad, because if the secret rares are not poggers, then the ultra rares are going to be poggers, one way or another. Yeah, anyways, Pack just showed up in chat, which means we end the stream immediately. Thank you guys so much for watching.